Hi, I'm John Bensich, CEO of ACHV Life Sciences. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Before we get going, I want to remind everyone that I will be making forward-looking statements today, so I encourage everyone to look at our filings on sec.gov, including the risk factors contained therein. ACHV Life Sciences is focused on the development of Cytisinicline as the potential new treatment for millions of smokers. This drug we're developing is being used as an aid for smoking cessation and a treatment for nicotine addiction. Now, this is an unusual product in that we have a tremendous amount of historical data that supports the safety and efficacy of the program. The product has been used by over 10,000 participants in historical clinical trials, including 3 more recent investigator-led large-scale trials in over 2,700 patients. The drug's also been used for over 20 years in Central and Eastern Europe to treat over 20 million subjects. But this is a drug that's never been approved in the US or in any major markets. So our goal is to really bring this drug out of obscurity and bring it to the market here in the US first, and then to the rest of the world thereafter. So to that end, we formed a relationship with Pharma, who's the originator of the product, and we entered into an exclusive license and supply agreement. And with that, we've moved quickly in the clinic. We opened up an IND here in the US in 2017, and aided in opening that was a partnership with the NIH, who supported an update to the non-clinical package that allowed us to open up that IND and get the drug into the clinic here in the US. So I'll talk a little bit today about some of the clinical data that we've generated, including our phase 2 ORCA-1 trial, as well as a little bit more about some of that historical data sets that we have, and then dovetailing into the initiation of our phase 3 ORCA-2 trial that we initiated in the 4th quarter of last year. So we see Cytisinicline as having a well-differentiated product profile. It's a single short course of treatment. Historically, that's been delivered over 25 days. We are extending that out to 6 weeks in the phase 3 trial, but we do see that as having advantages over the existing treatments, which are 12 weeks of treatment. The product also has a highly selective mechanism of action that ultimately leads to improved tolerability. And we think that's important in this category in particular. And finally, the product is also naturally derived. It comes from the seeds of the laburnum tree. And we continue to hear from subjects in our trials that this is an attractive element to the program. Now, this is a significant market opportunity. There's over 1 billion smokers worldwide, more than 34 million here in the US. The smoking cessation market in particular is $13 billion and growing. The most prescribed prescription therapeutic is Chantix or varenicline, that's had sales round about $1 billion over the last 3 years. Yet there has been no new treatment options in over a decade. So we do see there being a lot of demand for additional treatment options. When we look at the treatments available today, I mentioned Chantix already. The other approved prescription therapeutic is Zyban or bupropion, which is a repurposed depression drug. Both of these are oral drugs given on average for 12 weeks, and both have had historical safety concerns, both having black box warnings, Chantix in particular for suicidality. Now, outside of these 2 treatments, the other forms of options available are nicotine replacement therapy. This could be the gum, the patch, the lozenge. And these have been shown to be less effective and often just create substitute addictions. Now, we do know that quitting is extremely difficult. Most smokers have a desire to quit. About half make a quit attempt on an annual basis. But only roughly 7% of them are successful in those quit attempts. And even with the most efficacious option on the market, that of Chantix, 4 out of 5 patients will have relapsed 6 months post initiation of treatment. And they do estimate that it takes on average 8 to 11 quit attempts for a smoker to ultimately be successful. We've also seen that smoking rates, although declining over the last several decades, have remained flat over the last 3 years at roughly 34 million. And I think there's a good chance that when they report numbers for 2020, that we could actually see a slight increase given the pandemic and people being stressed and anxious and moving back to devices such as nicotine as well as alcohol. So this is a problem that really is not going away. When we look at the US market here, of those roughly 34 million smokers, less than 4% are getting treated by the market leader in Chantix. So why would that be? Is that because reimbursement is not in place? Well, we know that is not the case. In fact, the Affordable Care Act mandates that smoking cessation products be covered. And we see that approximately 80% of Chantix and bupropion prescriptions are delivered with no copay. We also see in the prescription data that a large portion of patients using Chantix do not make it through the 3-month course of therapy. In fact, only half of them make it to the 2nd month, and less than 25% make it to the 3rd month. And the number one reason given is side effects. So we do see, again, a product with a more tolerable safety profile as being advantageous. A little bit about the team here at ACHV Life Sciences. This is a team that has a history of increasing shareholder value. Our co-founders have been part of 3 previously approved products in this space. These have been developed through Amgen and through 2 other products that have been ultimately sold to the products commercializing them in BioMarin and Zogenix. Now, all of these products have a similar profile in that they all had human clinical data behind them when we got involved with the development. And we see ACHV in a similar manner. This is, again, a drug that has a tremendous amount of historical data behind it that gives us confidence in terms of the safety and efficacy. And our goal now is really to unlock the value as we drive this program forward. Now, a little bit about how the drug works in terms of the mechanism of action. The product specifically targets the alpha-4 beta-2 nicotine receptors in the brain, and it works in 2 distinct ways. It's a partial agonist and partial antagonist. So what that means is, in that one sense, the drug blocks the nicotine receptors. So if you continue to smoke on the program, you no longer get the same satisfaction that you did previously. But at higher concentrations, it also partially stimulates the receptor. So you get a little bit of the buzz associated with smoking, just at much lower levels. But this does help with the cravings and withdrawal symptoms associated with quitting. Now, this really is a validated target. In fact, the alpha-4 beta-2 receptor is the same target that Chantix or varenicline also hits. But that's really where the similarities end, because Chantix also has off-target effects and hits the alpha-7 and 5-HT3 receptors at high levels as well. And we believe these off-target effects are what is responsible for the adverse events associated with Chantix. Now, we think the alpha-7 receptor is responsible for the sleep disturbances, and the 5-HT3 receptor activity responsible for the nausea and vomiting that comes with Chantix. Now, if we look at how this plays out in the clinic, you can see that patients taking Chantix have approximately a 28% rate of nausea and vomiting. In addition, there's elevated levels of sleep disturbance, abnormal dreams and nightmares, insomnia, as well as headache. Now, with Cytisinicline, we have historically seen single-digit rates of adverse events. Again, we think this is incredibly important, given that smoking cessation really is more of an elective category compared to something like oncology, where patients are willing to put themselves through just about anything. So we think this advantageous side effect profile will ultimately lead to better compliance and better outcomes for patients. Now, a little bit about the historical clinical data and where we're going in the clinic. So I mentioned there have been 3 large-scale investigator-led trials with the program. We've listed those out here. The first of those was called the TASK trial. This was a double-blind, placebo-controlled trial in approximately 740 smokers. And what it found was that cytisinicline was superior to placebo and was 3.4 times more likely to result in the patient quitting at 12 months. The second trial, Cascade, this was a head-to-head trial against patients taking nicotine replacement therapy. This was designed as a non-inferiority trial and ultimately showed that cytisinicline was superior to nicotine replacement in getting patients to quit. We also announced just last year the first ever head-to-head trial against Chantix. This was done in 679 smokers down in New Zealand. And what this showed was that cytisinicline was at least as good as the market leader in getting patients to quit, and also showed that we had significantly fewer adverse events compared to Chantix. Now, if we look at that data a little bit further here, what we actually saw was there was a trend towards superior efficacy for cytisinicline. There was approximately a 55% improvement in patients quitting on cytisinicline, and very near showing superiority. We saw that the p-values were trending towards significance. And this was with approximately 1/3 of the target enrollment in the trial. And so overall, we were quite pleased with the result here in terms of the efficacy. Now, on the safety side, cytisinicline continues to shine here. We saw significantly lower adverse events. This was statistically significant. And this was really across all categories of adverse events you can see here. And these were individually significant at nausea, insomnia, as well as the abnormal dreams. And this is something that we've been seeing across trials, but this really reinforced that in the first ever head-to-head trial. Now, we also ran a dose selection trial. This was the ORCA-1 trial, and this was really to inform us on what was the best dose and administration to take forward into phase 3. We looked at 4 active arms versus matched placebo, and what we found was that a 3 milligrams 3 times a day dose and administration was the best of that set of groups that we tested. And at the end of treatment, we saw a 54% biochemically confirmed quit rate compared to 16% on placebo. And we saw that that effect was maintained over the subsequent 4-week period. We also saw that the adverse events were quite low, all single-digit rates of adverse events on the product, and that overall the drug was well tolerated. So if we look now at that 3 milligram 3 times a day, this is what we've taken forward into the ORCA-2 phase 3 trial. This is a 750 patient trial across 3 arms. Arm A is a placebo arm. Arm B is 6 weeks of cytisinicline, and Arm C is 12 weeks of cytisinicline. Now we have multiple primary endpoints on this trial. We'll be looking at the last 4 weeks of treatment in terms of showing a continuous abstinence rate. So weeks 3 through 6 on Arm B, weeks 9 through 12 on Arm C. So we could win at 6 weeks of treatment, we could win at 12, or what we expect is that we will win at both. And from a label perspective, a patient would be able to get a primary prescription for 6 weeks. And if they need a little bit longer to quit, they would be able to refill for an incremental 6 weeks. We think this is the right approach in this category. And we will be looking at this further as we go forward. The study is powered at over 95% to show differences at the long-term follow-up at 6 months. So this trial we initiated in the 4th quarter of last year. We're currently in the midst of enrollment, and we're targeting enrollment by the middle of this year. That would allow for top-line results in the first part of 2022. A little bit on the cap table. We ended 2020 with $35.9 million of cash and cash equivalents on the balance sheet. The company has no debt, and we've got just over 6 million shares outstanding in issuance. So in closing, Cytisinicline, we believe, is well positioned to address what continues to be a global public health epidemic. We think the product is well differentiated from existing products on the market that have a history of poor tolerability, including black box warnings. This continues to be a large market opportunity, and we've got a compelling foundation of evidence that supports the safety and efficacy of the product. And based on our interactions with the FDA, we've got a clear path to market, and we're really in execution mode to deliver what's required to get through an NDA filing. And we've got a proven management team that has a history of unlocking value in products such as Cytisinicline. So we appreciate everybody's interest in ACHV Life Sciences and the program, and we look forward to providing additional updates as we move things forward. Thanks again for taking the time.
Thank you, John Bensich, for that wonderful presentation on ACHV Life Sciences. We're now going to transition to the next part of today's virtual NDR, where John Vandermosen, Senior Biotech Analyst at Zacks Small Cap Research, will be asking John Bensich from ACHV Life Sciences some questions about the company. So with that, John, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Bobby. And hello, everyone. And welcome to our discussion today. As Bobby said, we're going to be speaking with ACHV Life Sciences CEO, John Bensich. ACHV is actually one of our favorite names given the advanced development stage of their candidate, Cytisinicline, and also its long history, or the drug's long history with favorable safety data, efficacy in several trials that looks like it could be better than the market leader, Chantix, and also a continued unmet need in smoking cessation. Right now, ACHV is running the first of 2 phase 3 trials that are required to gain FDA approval for Cytisinicline. Last year, they reported data from their phase 2 study, which demonstrated the efficacy of Cytisinicline compared to placebo with a dose-dependent response. One of Cytisinicline's most important characteristics is its favorable side effect profile in comparison with other products in the category. Given that many individuals stop smoking cessation therapy due to side effects like nausea, sleep problems, and unusual dreams, a new product that reduces these problems will see a lot more people finish their treatments. Cytisinicline has an interesting background. The drug comes from the seeds of the golden rain tree. This tree grows in southeastern Europe. It was initially used by Russian soldiers after World War II as a tobacco substitute, and in the 1960s and later as an anti-smoking aid. A Bulgarian company, SoPharma, which actually works right now with ACHV Life Sciences, they sold the drug in Eastern Europe and Russia for decades. And in the 1990s, Pfizer based its design of Chantix on the chemical structure of Cytisinicline. ACHV recognized the potential of Cytisinicline and decided to conduct clinical trials to get it approved in the US, and has been working on this project for over a decade so far. So with that background, let me give John a chance to introduce himself and the company, and then we'll get into questions. John?
Great. Thanks, John. Appreciate you taking the time today. Happy to be here. So I'm John Bensich, CEO of ACHV Life Sciences. I joined the company back in 2017. Originally as Chief Financial and Operating Officer, and then stepped into the CEO seat last fall. Really excited about the opportunity that we're working on here with Cytisinicline. You know, it's a bit of an unusual story in that this is a drug, like you mentioned, that has been around for many, many decades. There's been over 10,000 subjects as part of historical clinical trials that have been investigated with this product. It's been sold in Central and Eastern Europe for over 20 years. But it's a drug that's never been approved in the US. So we think there is a real opportunity to bring this drug out of obscurity and bring it to the major markets of the world. And we think we've got a really compelling proposition with the product that we're working on.
Definitely, definitely. So smoking, in contrast to a lot of other maybe diseases out there or things that can be treated is one of the most pervasive and preventable health issues faced today. I mean, we can do something about it, unlike perhaps cancer or heart disease or something. But actually, smoking is associated with cancer and heart disease, stroke, COPD, and numerous other maladies. Can you share some stats, John, on how many people are smoking nowadays and how many of these people want to quit and perhaps how many fail to do so?
Yeah, sure. So this, remains to be really a global epidemic. There's over 1 billion smokers around the globe today, and over 34 million in the U.S. alone. So it continues to be a huge problem. And smoking, is the leading cause of preventable death around the globe. So it really does cause a lot of damage from the downstream effects. And we do know that most smokers have a desire to quit. Over 70% indicate that. A little over half actually make a quit attempt annually, but only 7% are successful in quitting each year. So it really is a very small success rate. So we do really think that additional treatment options really are necessary to help people really quit and remain abstinent long term.
Yeah, going directly to the unmet need there. So you guys also did some internal survey work on smokers' attitudes and satisfaction with available treatments. What did they say in those surveys?
Yeah, so what we found was that the overall satisfaction with existing treatments that are available today was very low. We saw a lot of fear around the side effects of those treatments. So the suicidal tendencies, the nausea, things like that. And these were kind of the number one reasons for people to not start treatment. And then what we also saw was that the majority of smokers that do try some of the therapies that are out there, Chantix and Zyban, that the majority of them do not complete the 3-month course of therapy. And the number one reason given for non-compliance was the side effects. So we do see really, again, a real unmet need here to bring a product to market, that has a more tolerable safety profile.
Yeah. So I was looking at some of the most addictive drugs out there. I think there was a top 6 or 7, and nicotine was in that list. So why is it so hard to quit? Why do once we start smoking, we get going, we just can't stop?
Yeah, so I mean, like you mentioned, nicotine is, widely reported as the 3rd most addictive substance on the planet behind heroin and cocaine. So it really is very, very addictive. And we do know that, when you smoke, you overpopulate the nicotine receptors in the brain. And so the more they overpopulate, the more they're continuing to look for more and more nicotine, which is why it's kind of this cycle that's really hard to get out of. And so, what we see is that it typically takes folks 8 to 11 quit attempts to ultimately be successful. And when you think about a patient's journey overall, it, typically runs the gamut. A lot of folks start trying cold turkey. That may work for some, but the majority of people will relapse. From then, their next couple quit attempts may be going down to the CVS or Walgreens, picking up some form of nicotine replacement therapy, ultimately failing on that, and then having a conversation with their doctor about going on to one of the 2 prescription therapies. But even there, with Chantix being the most efficacious treatment on the market, 4 out of 5 patients will have relapsed by 6 months, based on data from the well-controlled trials. And we got to believe that that's worse in practice, given the non-compliance that I mentioned previously. So it really is very difficult. And I think the key really is the combination of therapy along with behavioral support. And that's something that we're also exploring in our trials currently.
Yeah. Well, since you brought up the trials, I did want to get into that for a little bit. So you started the first of 2 phase 3 trials right now. And as I mentioned, you completed the phase 2 last year and had some pretty good results from that, which I think they were just published in a journal article just a few days ago. Can you share some details from that phase 2 and kind of what you've seen so far in the phase 3 study at this point?
Yeah, absolutely. So the phase 2 trial was called ORCA-1, and this was really a dose-finding trial. And this was the first ever trial run with the drug in the U.S. using full U.S. behavioral support. And what we looked at was 4 different doses and administrations of the drug versus matched placebo. And what we found was that a 3 milligram dose dosed 3 times a day performed the best. And the quit rates we saw in that trial compare very favorably to Chantix and the other prescription therapies that are available today. In fact, the quit rates, at the same time points were numerically higher than what we see with Chantix. And so, we're quite excited about, moving this program now into phase 3, which we just launched in the back end of last year, and that is the ORCA-2 trial. And talking a little bit about that study, the key change that we made going from our phase 2 trial to phase 3 was to extend the dosing. Historically, this drug has been dosed over 25 days. We've extended that slightly out to 6 weeks. And we think this has a couple of benefits. The first is we think this could improve on the quit rates that we've seen previously. We know that, dosing a little bit longer should help prevent relapse from folks that did fail. So give them a little bit longer to get there. And then the other piece, which is really critical, is that the primary endpoint for approval in this setting is a 4-week continuous abstinence rate. Now at 25 days, we couldn't measure that while patients were still on drug. At 6 weeks, we can. And we know that quit rates are never higher than when you're on therapy. And the minute you remove therapy, there's a natural relapse rate, just given environmental factors, things like that. So again, we think that combination of the longer treatment really should be a great setup for the phase 3 trial.
Yeah. Well, I was actually going to ask you about that. Some of the changes that you've made that actually could improve the results in the phase 3 trial compared to historical results, because there have been a lot of other trials that have been conducted with this, and I was going to ask you about that later. But wanted to touch on the leading drug in the space right now, Chantix, just to kind of give investors an idea of what the possibility might be. We've looked at revenues for Chantix in our group over here, and they're about $1 billion. They've been in the $1 billion range for the last 3 years. So what do you think, if Cytisinicline could potentially improve on that, what do you think the market size could be for the drug?
Yeah, well, if we go back to when Chantix was originally launched, it was meant to be a $2 billion product. But a couple of years into that commercialization, they got hit with a black box warning for suicidality. And that significantly hampered the sales potential of that product. And I think that baggage really hasn't gone away. I mean, it has a checkered tolerability profile to begin with. And you're not going to erase, almost a decade of patient blogs, voicing concerns over the suicidality and nausea and vomiting and things like that. But with that, I think Pfizer's done quite well with Chantix. Like you said, it's done, nearly $1 billion over the last several years. But most of the growth they've seen has been through price increases. They've doubled the list price over 5 years with annual price increases. And I think, there's a real opportunity here to expand the market the way we see it. There hasn't been any new therapies approved in over a decade. Chantix was the last approved therapy. So we do see a lot of pent up demand for new treatment options. So we think there is really, huge potential here, including that, currently less than 4% of smokers are being treated annually with Chantix. And again, based on what we've seen in the data, people are not satisfied with that product and not using it because of the fear of the side effects. So we do think there's real potential here for a new treatment option that would give people, hope that this is going to be the treatment that will get them over the finish line to quit for good.
Yeah, definitely. And the side effects, as we discussed before, are really, really key to that. Not only not only making it more easy to take the therapy, but more individuals will probably complete it just because they're not disincentivized to do it. So, on that same topic, fewer side effects is one of the big features of cytisinicline. What else is there? What else would you point out as a benefit of this product compared to others that would give it a leg up in the market?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of other features here. I think the first is the shorter course of treatment. Even at 6 weeks, we're half the duration of Chantix and Zyban. And we think that's really important for quitters. It's one of those things that, the farther out you put the goal line, I think the more difficult it is to visualize. And I think that shorter course of treatment really resonates with smokers looking to quit. The other feature is the product is naturally derived. And we continue to hear from patients as well as subjects in our trials that is really an attractive attribute. And this has come across in some of the survey work that we did that really showed kind of high levels of support and attraction for a new natural treatment option. Yeah,
well, that's great. Yeah, and it comes from the golden chain tree, I think, as we mentioned earlier. So one of the most important considerations for the FDA in granting approval for a product is safety. And compared to many other in development products, cytisinicline is really a well-known entity. I mean, it's been used for, I think, at least 20 years. 50, sorry. And it's been used by over 20 million smokers, I think. It's been studied, and you can probably tell me the stat for this, over 1,000 or 10. Maybe you said it earlier, but yeah, exactly. I mean, it's well known. So how does that help during the approval process when you get there? How does that help get this across the finish line?
Yeah, so from the FDA perspective first, I think they are taking a very cautious approach, with cytisinicline. And I think that's in large part due to the history and experience they had with Chantix. They approved that product again a couple of years in. They had to put a black box warning on there for suicidality. And so I think, given they were burned with that product, they've been very conservative in their approach. And so for us, we're really being held to the same standard of any new chemical entity that's coming to market. So, we're creating basically a US-centric safety database with kind of US safety reporting to get all the information to the FDA to give them comfort with effectively what we've seen for, well over 2 decades of in-market experience in Eastern Europe. So I think from a logistical perspective, think of this as a new product, but I think from a risk profile perspective, I think the history with the product gives us a lot of confidence in terms of both the safety and efficacy that we'll be able to repeat what we've seen historically with this drug.
Yeah, definitely. And as I mentioned earlier, and as you mentioned earlier as well, there've been a lot of other studies that have been done on this. And one that was done independently was the ROARA study. I think it's a really important study that, because nobody had a stake in what the outcome was, except just the benefit of the patient. It had some really good data in support of cytisinicline. And can you talk about what that trial showed, and summarize the results for us?
Yeah, and I think it's a good point to just bring up. Yes, some of these historical trials, are really important to kind of the background of the compound we're moving forward. And there's actually been 3 large-scale investigator-led trials, including the ROARA that you mentioned. The first, though, was the TASK study, and this was the first trial done to current GCP standards. And this was a double-blind placebo-controlled trial that showed the product was superior to placebo and 3.4 times more likely to get a patient to quit. And then on the heels of that, there was a trial called Cascade. And this was a head-to-head against nicotine replacement. It was designed as a non-inferiority trial to see if we were at least as good as nicotine replacement therapy. So the gum, the patch, the lozenge. And what we found was that we were superior to NRT in that trial. And then the last in the series of these was ROARA that we were very happy to announce last year and see published here earlier this year. And this was the first ever head-to-head trial against Chantix. What it showed was that the drug was at least as good as Chantix, the market leader, but had significantly fewer adverse events. It was roughly half the rate of adverse events of Chantix. And this is something that we had seen, comparing across trials historically, but to see it in the same setting, was a really critical outcome for us. And then on the efficacy side, we actually had numerically higher quit rates to Chantix. It was about a 55% improvement over the quit rates we saw with subjects taking Chantix in that trial, and it was trending towards significance. It didn't quite get there, but I think it was also that trial was being used with a 1.5 milligram dose. So it was basically an unoptimized dose and administration in that trial. So again, I think the phase 3 trial that we're currently working on, I think we'll read out how that higher 3 milligram 3 times a day dose gives us hopefully better efficacy than what we've seen historically.
Definitely. Well, I think another point from the trial is they did not enroll to their target numbers either. So if they had and they saw the same kind of results in that population, it probably would have crossed into superiority. It's just that they didn't enroll enough. Isn't that right?
Yeah, no, they enrolled a third of the target enrollment.
Right. So that's pretty impressive, I think, right? That they were able to get that kind of number with only a third of their target enrollment, which, was designed to get statistical significance. So we got really, really close with only a third. So
yes, correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's pretty good, I think. We here at Zacks think that. Great. Well, there's a lot of options that you mentioned. You mentioned nicotine gum, kind of where people start out, patches, Chantix, Zyban, and several others. And the success rate is relatively low. And what are these products missing? I mean, we've talked about it with Chantix where, the side effects are an issue. But, what are they not getting? And what's the unmet need here?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think you think of it, it feels like there's lots of treatment options, but there's really only 3 on the market. So there's nicotine replacement therapy, Zyban, or bupropion, as its drug name is called, which is a repurposed depression drug. And then Chantix. So those are really your 3 options. And what we know is that nicotine replacement therapy is the least effective of all those. And it's really just, it can lead to substitute addictions. So, you can pick this up over the counter, try the gum, the patch, the lozenge. Typically people don't take it according to, how it's prescribed. And so, we often see people just use these long term just to continue to get their nicotine and really not wean themselves off. Including my uncle who quit, a little over 3 years ago, and he still uses the lozenge on a daily basis. So it's quite common to see that. Bupropion, again, it works, but Chantix has been shown in multiple trials that it's superior to bupropion, so it's rarely used. And then Chantix, I think with its safety and tolerability concerns, leads to a lot of non-compliance and people, really not willing to try the product. So I think when you look at it in that view, there really is room for another treatment option. And what we, hear from our key opinion leaders and some of the thought leaders in the space is that with the profile we have with Cytisinicline, with, at least as good of efficacy to Chantix, a shorter course of treatment and much tolerable safety profile, it could very well lead to being the gold standard for smoking cessation. So we think that product profile really, really resonates. And I think just on the safety issues across the board with, both bupropion and Chantix, I think really does lead, to a lot of non-compliance. And so I think, if we're able to get patients to stay on therapy, get through treatment, it should really lead to better outcomes overall.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we're going to ask you about a different type of nicotine replacement therapy a little bit further down the questions. But before I get there, I wanted to touch on the pandemic and smoking. There's been some news about that. I think early on, we're kind of wondering how that would affect smoking trends and the desire to quit trends. So, from the information you've seen, has concern about the pandemic led to an increase in the desire to stop smoking? Given that it's that COVID-19 is a respiratory disease and smoking is, tightly interacting with that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we've seen a lot of publications come out on more quit attempts occurring, over the last 12 months. Clearly, COVID-19 is a respiratory disease. It's well documented that smokers have worse outcomes if they do get COVID-19. So it has been a great time to make quit attempts. But I think with that being said, we've also seen the other side of the coin, which is that the pandemic has caused a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety for people. And so people are kind of retrenching into their vices, smoking being one of them. We just saw earlier this year, Altria report, their earnings, and we did see basically a halt to the decline in cigarette sales. It actually was flat and slightly up over the last year. And I think that's kind of an interesting artifact here that, we really haven't seen a decline in the number of smokers in the US since 2017. And I think we very well may see a slight uptick when the numbers are reported for 2020, just related to that, coping mechanism around the pandemic.
Yeah. I mean, the stress kind of brings that on, but I think it doesn't change the desire to quit. I mean, that's still there. It's just been delayed a bit. So the other nicotine replacement therapy out there is called vaping, which has a bunch of risks. It's really surged. I think you were telling me, gosh, it was a really big number of vapors that have emerged over the last, several years since it started. But it is a big problem with nicotine addiction. While it may get you off smoking, there are a bunch of issues related to it. There's a lot of chemicals in the vaping fluid that, we don't know how damaging they are. So what's ACHV working on in this space, and any observations on vaping? And you guys have mentioned that you may participate in a trial. Get us up to speed on how that looks from ACHV's standpoint.
Yeah, so I think from a market perspective, we see this as a real expansion opportunity, frankly, and I think it's a bit sad to see, because this is an area that's come from almost no users a decade ago to nearly 14 million today. And I think a large portion of those are youth that probably never would have picked up a cigarette to begin with, because there's been large strides made in getting youth, to not pick up smoking. But the opportunity is real. Nobody's really working in this area, given the other products are either generic or in the process of going generic. So we think this is an area of the market that we have the opportunity to wholly own long term. And so, we have designed a phase 2 trial to explore the product in e-cigarette users. It's a 150 patient trial. We're currently exploring grant funding to move it forward, but I think regardless of where that comes out, this is a logical expansion for us, based on the way the drug works. It targets the nicotine receptors in the brain. There's a real logical extension of why it should work, for any form of nicotine addiction. And I think if we're able to expand, we could not just be an aid to smoking cessation, but a treatment for nicotine addiction more generally. And I think that would really set us apart in the marketplace today.
Definitely. And you actually did some other survey work on vaping and found out some pretty interesting things about e-cigarette attitudes and perceptions. What are some of the conclusions you were able to come to with that?
Yeah, and I think you mentioned, so are e-cigarettes a smoking cessation tool or just another form of nicotine addiction? And I think the jury's still out there. But what we saw in our survey work is that the primary reason for people to initiate e-cigarette use was to quit combustible cigarettes. But what we also saw was that a lot of the folks that originally moved over to the e-cigarettes to quit were now ending up being dual users. So, frankly, they became more addicted to nicotine than they were before. So still smoking, but now adding vaping to the mix. So it really continues to be a problem that, very few people actually move over from smoking to vaping and never go back to cigarettes. So we see a huge opportunity there. to help folks. And what we saw also in that survey work was that 73% of e-cigarette users said they intend to quit vaping in the next 3 to 12 months. So again, there is a willingness or wanting to quit from that group as well. So very similar to what we see on folks who are smoking cigarettes. And of those who say they do want to quit, there was a very likely to extremely likely result in terms of those willing to try a new prescription therapy to help them quit. So again, we see that as being a real sweet spot for us long term.
Yeah, definitely. Well, John, remind everyone what the market cap of your company is right about now, just kind of the average over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, so we've been kind of in the mid 60 million market cap range.
Okay.
We see that as a real mispricing in the
as do we
for the opportunity here. So we don't think there's a lot of companies out there that have a drug in phase 3 with the history behind it of safety and efficacy in a large market indication. With the kind of dynamics of the market cap that we have today. So we see it as a real strong investment opportunity.
Yeah, well, definitely. And that's the point that we try to make at Zacks, because we, as probably most people know, we do cover Achieve Life Sciences. They are a client of ours. And we make the point that there's a potential $1 billion revenue opportunity from this product for a company that's trading at $60 million. So if you think, if it's approved, that there is a one-time sales valuation perhaps attached to that. I'll let the listeners and viewers do the math, but $60 million market cap, $1 billion sales opportunity. It seems pretty good to me. And it actually is one of our favorite ideas that we try to share with investors who are looking for something a little bit different. Oncology is like a really big area. If you're not interested in that or looking for something a little bit outside kind of the normal channels of biotech, this is definitely something that should be considered. John, thank you so much for chatting with me today. It was a really good conversation. If the viewers are interested in getting more information, please visit scr.zacks.com and you can find our initiation report on Achieve, which outlines our thesis and also updates for the latest reports that Achieve has done. So again, thank you. And I'm glad you are here today to enjoy our discussion with John Bencich, CEO of Achieve Life Sciences.
Yep. Thank you, John. Appreciate it.